Dear students, today we will discuss about periods of English literature. According to M.H. Abrams, historians have divided the continuity of English literature into segments of time, which are called periods. And the first segment of time starts from 450 and goes up to 1066 AD. Now, basically, it is a period which started with the invasion of Celtic England by Germanic tribes somewhere around 420, and it extends up to the conquest of England in 1066 AD by Norman French rulers under the leadership of William the Conqueror. This period is famous for poetry written in vernacular English, of course, the Old English, or what we call it as Anglo Saxon English, uh, by Christian writers who wrote about the conditions of the pagan past. The famous poems include Beowulf, The Seafarer, and Deor. Caedmon and Cynewulf are two poets from this period who wrote on biblical and religious themes. The next period in English literature starts from 1066 AD and extends up to 1500 AD. This is called the Middle English period or the period of Anglo Norman rule. This is the period when the known Latin literature was mostly written in Anglo Norman, the French dialect spoken by the invaders. The next period starts from 1500 and extends up to 1660. It is called the early modern or the Renaissance period. This period can further be divided into four sub periods. The first one is from 1558 to 1603. This is one of the most crucial periods of English literature or English history per se. It is the Elizabethan age, and during this period, we see the blooming of nationalist feeling and the greatest of English literature at the same time. It is the age of Sir Philip Sidney, Christopher Marlowe, Edmund Spenser, William Shakespeare, Sir Walter Raleigh, Francis Bacon, Ben Jonson, and many other extraordinary writers. The next period is Jacobean period or the age of James I, which starts in 1603 and ends in 1625. Now, this period is famous for its prose writers like Francis Bacon, John Donne's Sermons, Robert Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy, and most importantly, the translation of Bible by King James. Then we have the Caroline Age, which extends from 1625 to 1649. This is the time of Charles I, and this period is famous for John Milton. In fact, he just started writing during this period. The religious poet George Herbert, and prose writers like Robert Burton and Sir Thomas Browne. And of course, the Cavalier poets, Robert Herrick being the most important among them. Others also include Richard Lovelace, Sir John Suckling, and Thomas Carew. The next period is the Commonwealth period or Puritan interregnum, which extended from 1649 to 1660. Actually, it is the period which extends from the end of the Civil War and the execution of Charles I in 1649 to the restoration of the Stuart monarchy under Charles II in 1660. And this is the period of Milton, primarily his epics, and of course Hobbes, Thomas Fuller, Jeremy Taylor, Henry Vaughan, Edmund Waller, Abraham Cowley. Sir William Devent, and Andrew Marvell. The period between 1660 to 1785 is broadly termed as the neoclassical age. And this neoclassical era has been further subdivided into the Restoration Age, the Augustan Age, and the Age of Sensibility. We will talk about the Restoration Age to begin with, and this Restoration Age extends from 1660 to 1700. The Restoration Age is famous for its dramatists like Sir George Etheridge, William Wycherley, William Congreve, John Dryden, Samuel Butler. Samuel Butler was, of course, a satirist. This period is also called the Age of Dryden after his heroic dramas, and it is followed by the Augustan Age or the age of Alexander Pope. Augustan age extends from 1700 to 1745, and this is also the period when we see the emergence of fiction or the novel writing. We have Daniel Defoe writing Robinson Crusoe during this period, and of course, Lady Montague and so many other novelists who have started writing a new genre altogether. The period from 1744 to 1785 is roughly termed as the Age of Sensibility or Age of Johnson. Age of Sensibility is followed by a Romantic period, probably one of the most important periods of the English literature. And there is no fixed demarcation, but roughly we take it from 1789 onwards. In 1798, William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge published Lyrical Ballad. Uh, this book is taken up as the harbinger of the Romantic era. In preface to Lyrical Ballads, they have given certain characteristics, they have talked about certain characteristics which highlighted the features, common features of the writers writing during the Romantic period. Major English writers of the period, in addition to Wordsworth and Coleridge, were the poets Robert Burns, William Blake, Lord Byron, P.B. Shelley, John Keats, and prose writers like Charles Lamb, William Hazlitt, Thomas De Quincey, Mary Wollstonecraft, and Leigh Hunt. And of course, the novelists who include Jane Austen, Sir Walter Scott, and Mary Shelley. Now, this period it also overlaps with a very interesting feature in English literature, that is the Gothic romance. Gothic romance was written during this period, and the famous writers included William Beckford, Matthew Lewis, William Godwin, etc. Next, we have the Victorian period, which historians either start from 1832, the year of the passage of the first Reform Bill, or from 1837, the year of the accession of Queen Victoria, and it extends up to the death of the Queen in 1901. Historians sometimes divide this period in three subperiods: early Victorian, middle Victorian, and late Victorian, which of course incorporate the pre Raphaelites and later on the aesthetic and decadent writers. Among the notable poets of this period were Alfred Lord Tennyson, the representative poet of this era, then Robert Browning, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, Christina Rossetti, Matthew Arnold, and G.M. Hopkins. The prominent essayists of this period include Thomas Carlyle, John Ruskin, Matthew Arnold, and Walter Pater. Some important novelists during this period were the Bronte sisters, Charles Dickens, William Makepeace Thackeray, Elizabeth Gaskell, George Eliot, George Meredith, Thomas Hardy, and Samuel Butler. Then we have the Edwardian period, which starts from 1901 and ends in 1910. The period of King Edward the Seventh. This period is famous for poems by Thomas Hardy, William Butler Yeats, and Rudyard Kipling. Major dramatists of this period include Arthur Jones, James Barrie, John Galsworthy, George Bernard Shaw, and the playwrights of the Celtic revival such as Yeats and J.M. Synge. And of course, there were many uh, others who were writing prose fiction like H.G. Wells, Rudyard Kipling, Henry James, uh, etc. The Edwardian period is followed by the Georgian period, which extends from 1910 to 1936, which is overlapped by the modern period, which starts from 1914 and extends up to the end of the Second World War, that is 1945. And 1945 basically is the year of the beginning of the postmodern literature of English language. So these are the different periods of English literature